This is the story of how the Titanic drowned. Hi everyone! Welcome to this channel. The year is 1911. For 3 years now, the Titanic has been sailing the seas, transporting passengers between Europe and the United States. It was the largest ship afloat and considered to be unsinkable. But that all changed on April 14th, when at around 11:40 p.m., while sailing through an iceberg field, it struck an iceberg, causing it to begin to sink. Within 2 hours, it was completely submerged. More than 1,500 people had perished in the disaster. To this day, it remains one of the deadliest sinking accidents in history. But what caused the sinking of the Titanic? Was it the iceberg, the ship's speed, or maybe some bad luck? Well, yes. But those things were just the final straw. The real cause of the sinking of the Titanic was a series of unfortunate events that started long before the ship set sail. The first event that led to the sinking of the Titanic was its construction. You see, the Titanic wasn't built to be the most durable ship ever made. In fact, its construction was quite rushed. This was because the White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic, was in a race with their biggest competitor, the British India Steam Navigation Company, to introduce the largest and most luxurious ships on the market. This meant that the Titanic's construction was rushed and corners were cut. For example, the rivets that held the ship together weren't fastened correctly, which would eventually lead to the ship's demise. Additionally, the steel used to build the Titanic was of inferior quality. This made the ship more brittle and less likely to bend without breaking. Finally, the Titanic's watertight doors were designed to be opened from the outside, which proved fatal during the sinking. But even with these flaws, the Titanic shouldn't have sunk. That's because the next thing that led to the sinking of the Titanic was a miscalculation. You see, even though the Titanic was unsinkable, it still had limits, and those limits were tested every time the ship sailed through an iceberg field. But the crew of the Titanic underestimated just how powerful the icebergs were. They thought that the ship's hull was strong enough to withstand the impact of an iceberg, but they were wrong. However, even if the crew had known that the Titanic wouldn't survive an iceberg collision, it still might not have sunk. Because the third thing that led to the sinking of the Titanic was a series of coincidences. You see, on the night the Titanic sank, there happened to be an unusually bright, full moon, which made it easier to see the icebergs in the water. However, on this particular night, the crew of the Titanic failed to take advantage of the moonlight and properly scan the horizon for icebergs. As a result, they didn't see the iceberg that was directly in their path until it was too late. If they had seen the iceberg sooner, they could have easily maneuvered the ship to avoid a collision. But even if the crew had done everything right, it still might not have mattered. That's because the fourth thing that led to the sinking of the Titanic was simply bad luck. You see, after the Titanic collided with the iceberg, it only had one chance to survive. That was to pump out the water that had flooded into the ship's hull. If they could do that, the ship would stay afloat long enough for a rescue boat to arrive. But the Titanic's pumps weren't working properly, which meant that the ship began to sink faster than expected. If the pumps had been working, the Titanic could have stayed afloat for several hours longer, which would have given the passengers and crew a better chance of survival. In the end, the sinking of the Titanic was a perfect storm of bad luck, bad decisions, and natural disaster. No one thing caused the sinking of the Titanic. Instead, it was a combination of many things. If one or two of these factors had been different, it's likely that the Titanic would have survived. But as we know, fate had other plans. Now, what are your thoughts about the sinking of the Titanic? Do you think it could have been avoided? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.